The Friday night crowd at the Meridian moved the way money always moves, quietly, deliberately, as though the very air on the 18th floor had been conditioned not just to a perfect 68 degrees, but to a perfect kind of silence. Crystal caught the light. Conversation stayed low, and Dorothy Mae Washington moved between tables the way she had moved through the last 12 years of her life, with the particular grace of a woman who had learned that invisibility, when worn with dignity, could pass for elegance. Most of the guests never really looked at her. That was fine. Dot had stopped needing to be seen a long time ago. She was 63 years old, with silver hair she kept pinned back at the nape of her neck, and hands that told her whole story if you knew how to read them. The knuckles were slightly enlarged now, nothing painful, just the honest record of time. Once those hands had moved across the keys of a Baldwin grand piano at the First Jerusalem Baptist Church every Sunday morning, drawing music out of the instrument the way you draw water from a deep well, patiently, with your whole body. After the divorce, she had taught private students for years, then worked in school administration until the budget cuts of 2011 took that from her, too. The Meridian had been next, 12 years of silver trays and wine that cost more per bottle than she made in a shift. She didn't dwell on that arithmetic. Dwelling was a luxury she had learned to refuse. Dot. Beverly Okafor appeared at her elbow, clipboard in hand, her accent still carrying the particular music of Lagos even after 15 years in Atlanta. Beverly was 41, sharp as a tack, and the only person on staff who knew more than the surface of Dot's story. Mr. Cole is confirmed for Table 7, penthouse guest. He specifically requested the VIP section. No company, no press. Mr. Harrison says he's our most important booking this quarter. Isaiah Cole, Dot said. Not a question. You know him? I know of him. Everyone in Atlanta with a pulse knew of Isaiah Damon Cole. Cole Energy Solutions. 35 years old and already the subject of 3 Forbes covers. The kind of man who changed industries the way weather changes. You didn't see it coming until it had already arrived. Any special requirements? Just perfection, Beverly said, with the small, dry smile she reserved for understatement. Dot straightened her jacket and moved toward Table 7. He arrived at precisely 8 o'clock, the way powerful people arrive. Not rushing, not pausing, simply appearing at the exact moment they intended to. Isaiah Cole was taller than she expected from photographs, with a stillness about him that read less like arrogance and more like a man who had long ago stopped feeling the need to fill silence with noise. Dark skin, deep brown eyes that moved across the room in one practiced sweep before settling. He wore a white dress shirt with the collar open, no tie, no show, and he sat down without consulting the menu he had been handed. Good evening, sir. Dot's voice was what it always was on the floor, warm, professional, giving nothing away. May I pour for you tonight? We have an excellent— Water, please. Still. He glanced up briefly. And I'll trust the kitchen's judgment on the tasting menu. Of course. She reached for the crystal pitcher on the service cart, and that was when it happened. He extended his hand across the table to accept the printed menu she offered, a small, ordinary gesture, and his sleeve rode up 2 inches above his wrist. On the inside of his right wrist, there was a birthmark, small, the color of dark mahogany, shaped unmistakably like a 5-pointed star, irregular at the edges, no larger than a quarter. The crystal pitcher didn't shatter. It didn't even slip. But Dot's hand went cold from the inside out, a wave of cold that started somewhere deep in her chest and radiated outward to her fingertips. And for one terrible floating second, she was not standing in the VIP dining room of the Meridian in Atlanta, Georgia. She was not 63 years old. She was in a hospital room. She was 28 years old. She was holding something so small and so perfect that she was afraid to breathe. Hold him, the nurse had said. While you can. She had counted his fingers. All 10. She had counted his toes through the thin receiving blanket. And she had found on the inside of his right wrist a birthmark the shape of a 5-pointed star, identical to the one she had carried on her own left wrist since the day she was born, the one her grandmother had called the mark of someone the Lord intends to keep. They had told her he hadn't been kept. They had told her his lungs were too small, too early, too unprepared for a world that had startled him into arriving 3 months before he was ready. They had told her this at 6 o'clock in the morning, when the light through the hospital blinds was the gray of old dishwater, and Reginald Washington was still not there. She had held the baby for 3 hours before they told her. His name was Isaiah. She had already decided that. "Ma'am?" Dot blinked. Isaiah Cole was looking at her, not with irritation, not with the impatience of a man accustomed to instant service. He was looking at her with something quieter than that, something that later she would spend a long time trying to name. "I apologize," she said. Her voice was exactly level. 20 years of practice. "Forgive me, sir. Are you all right?" "Perfectly fine, thank you." She poured the water. Her hand did not shake. She moved through the remainder of the service with the precision of someone navigating by instruments alone, through clouds so thick they cannot see the ground. She brought the amuse-bouche. She described the first course. She refreshed the water glass with a steady hand. But every time she approached table 7, she found reasons to let her gaze drop to his right wrist. The birthmark was always there. It didn't change. It didn't become something else the longer she looked at it. 5-pointed, dark mahogany, no larger than a quarter. As the evening stretched on, she began to notice other things. The things you notice when something has cracked open inside you and light is getting in whether you want it to or not. He had her eyes. Not just the color, a deep brown so dark it read almost black in low light, but the shape of them, the slight downward tilt at the outer corners that her mother had always called sad eyes, that smile. He held his fork with 2 fingers extended along the handle, the way Dot had always held hers. He touched his temple with 2 fingers when he was thinking, reading something on his phone between courses, and she recognized the gesture with a jolt that traveled the length of her spine. "Stop it," she told herself, moving toward the kitchen with an empty bread plate. "Stop this right now. People share features. People share mannerisms. You are a 63-year-old woman who buried her son 35 years ago, and what you are doing right now is grief wearing the costume of hope, and you know better than anyone what that kind of thinking costs." She knew. She did know. But when she returned to table 7 with his 4th course, his sleeve had shifted again, and the star was there, and her left wrist began to ache, the way old bones ache before rain. After service, she sat in the staff break room with her shoes off and her phone in both hands. The other servers moved around her, changing out of uniforms, talking about their evenings, planning where they were going after. Dot barely heard them. She typed into the search bar with thumbs that had finally begun to tremble. Isaiah Cole birthmark. Nothing useful. Isaiah Cole, early life family background Atlanta. She read for 20 minutes. Every major profile, every feature piece, every interview from the past decade. Isaiah Cole had been born and raised in Savannah, Georgia. His parents were Harold Eugene Cole, a minister and civic leader, and Gloria May Cole, a woman renowned throughout the state for her philanthropic work. The Coles were a distinguished family. Old money, old faith, old Georgia in the best sense of that phrase. They had no biological children. They had adopted Isaiah when he was approximately 6 months old. Late 1989. Dot's son had been born March 14th, 1989. If he had lived, if the hospital had been wrong, if something unspeakable had happened that night, something she had spent 35 years being too broken to fully imagine, then 6 months after March would be September. October, late 1989. She sat very still with the phone in her hands and the noise of the break room around her and the taste of something enormous and terrible rising in the back of her throat. On her left wrist, the 5-pointed star sat where it had always sat. Small, dark mahogany, no larger than a quarter. She did not sleep that night. She arrived 2 hours before her shift the following morning. Beverly was walking in from the parking structure when she saw Dot already in the lobby, already in uniform, already moving with purpose toward the service corridor. "Dot!" Beverly stopped. "It's 6:15. Couldn't sleep. Not a lie. Beverly studied her for a moment with the particular attention of a woman who had seen enough of life not to be fooled by the surface of things. Then she said carefully, "Mr. Cole has extended his stay. 2 more nights." A pause. "He requested room service breakfast this morning. Asked specifically for you to bring it up." Dot felt something move through her chest. Not quite fear, not quite hope. The thing that lives between the two. Did he say why? He didn't explain. Beverly's eyes were steady on hers. "Dot, whatever is happening with you today, I need you to tell me if you can't handle this assignment." "I can handle it." "You're sure?" "Beverly." Dot met her eyes. I have been handling things that would drop other people for 35 years. I can bring a man his breakfast. Beverly held her gaze a moment longer. Then she handed over the order slip. Penthouse. He's expecting you at 8. The elevator to the penthouse level moved slowly, or perhaps time was moving slowly. Dot had noticed that about significant moments, the way they stretched themselves gave you too much time to think. She had the service cart in front of her. Eggs, fruit, coffee, juice, a small vase with a single yellow rose that the kitchen added to every penthouse breakfast as a matter of policy. In her cardigan pocket, folded into a square no larger than her palm, was a photograph she had brought from home. She had not planned to bring it. She had stood in her small kitchen at 5 in the morning, opening the cedar box she kept on the high shelf of her bedroom closet, the box that held the only physical remnants of a life that had lasted 3 hours. And she had taken out the photograph because she could not stop looking at it. And then she had found herself putting on her coat with it still in her hand. It was a Polaroid, taken by a nurse whose name Dot would never remember. The image had the particular quality of 1989 hospital lighting, slightly yellow, slightly blurred at the edges. In it, Dot was propped against hospital pillows with the particular vacancy of a woman running on no sleep and too much medication. In her arms was a bundle, impossibly small, wrapped in a white receiving blanket. You could not see the birthmark in the photograph, but Dot knew it was there. She knocked on the penthouse door. Isaiah Cole opened it himself, already dressed, charcoal trousers and a pale blue shirt, cuffs rolled to the elbow. The birthmark was immediately visible on his right wrist. He wasn't hiding it. Dot had the sudden disorienting sense that he never hid it, that it had never occurred to him to hide it, and that in fact he might have made a small, deliberate point of ensuring she could see it clearly. Mrs. Washington. He stepped back to let her in. Thank you for coming up yourself. Of course, sir. She wheeled the cart toward the dining table by the floor-to-ceiling windows. Atlanta spread itself below them in the early morning light, the skyline, the trees, the far green smudge of Piedmont Park. She began arranging the place setting with the efficiency of 12 years' practice. Sit down. She paused. Set down the coffee cup she was holding. Sir? Please. He gestured to the chair across from his own. Not a command. Something closer to a request from a person unaccustomed to making requests. There's something I'd like to discuss with you. She sat on the edge of the chair. Her hands were in her lap. She could feel the square of the photograph through the fabric of her cardigan pocket, pressing against her ribs like a small, insistent hand. Isaiah Cole sat down across from her, poured his own coffee. He didn't wait for her to do it. He was not the kind of man who waited for things he could do himself, and then set the cup down and looked at her directly. I rarely forget a face, he said, but you already know that's not why I asked for you. Dot said nothing. I noticed your birthmark last night. His voice was even, measured. When you poured my water, your left wrist. He extended his own right arm across the table. I've had mine since I was born. My mother, Gloria. She called it the Lord's thumbprint. The corner of his mouth moved, almost a smile. She said it meant I was claimed. Mine too, Dot said. The words came out before she decided to say them. I know. He looked at her steadily. I noticed it before you noticed mine. The room was very quiet. Outside, Atlanta was waking up. Inside the penthouse, something else was waking up. Something that had been in a kind of sleep for 35 years, or perhaps something that had never been asleep at all, only waiting. Mrs. Washington, Isaiah Cole said carefully, I want to be honest with you, because I think you deserve honesty more than you have been given credit for. I did not come to Atlanta on my way to the Meridian. I came to the Meridian, and Atlanta was incidental. He reached into this breast pocket of his shirt and laid a single folded piece of paper on the table between them. I have been looking for you for 4 months. Dot stared at the paper, did not touch it. Open it, he said gently. She unfolded it. It was a photocopy of a handwritten note, the handwriting of an elderly woman, careful and slightly shaky, the kind of penmanship that belonged to a generation that had been graded on it. To the real mother of my son, I don't have the courage to find your address. I'm not sure I deserve to, but I need you to know that he is good. He is so good. He looks for the best in people the way some people look for the worst, and I don't know where that comes from because it didn't come from me. Maybe it came from you. I hope it came from you. I'm sorry. I have been sorry every day since March of 1989. I will be sorry every day until I am done with days. Gloria M. Cole Dot read it twice. Then she reached into her cardigan pocket and placed the Polaroid photograph on the table. Isaiah looked at it for a long moment. The hospital room, the young woman in the bed, the tiny bundle. When he looked up, something in his face had shifted. Not broken, but opened, the way a window opens to let weather in. She left me a box, he said quietly. When she died, she said to open it when I was ready to know where I came from. I waited 3 years. He looked down at the photograph again. Inside was that note, and a piece of paper with 4 words on it. Dr. Patricia Holloway, Reggie Washington, Grady, March 1989. He met her eyes. It took me 4 months to find you, but I found you. Dot's hands were flat on the table, on either side of the photograph. She looked at this man, this stranger, this not stranger, this 35-year-old man with her eyes and her grandmother's birthmark, and she felt something she did not have a word for. Not joy, too complicated for joy, not grief. She had graduated from grief. Something in between, or something entirely new, that no one had needed to name before because no one had stood exactly here before. You let me see your wrist on purpose last night, she said. Yes. You were testing me. He considered this. I was giving you the choice, whether to see it or not, whether to follow where it led. A pause. Some people would have looked and looked away. I needed to know what kind of person you were. And now you know? You brought a photograph, he said simply. You have been carrying it for 35 years. That tells me what I needed to know. Outside the penthouse window, the morning light was full and gold across Atlanta. Dot looked at the city she had lived in her whole life, the city that had held her losses and her diminishments and her 12 years of invisible service, and she felt, for the first time in longer than she could calculate, that the ground beneath her might be something she could stand on. What do you want to do? She asked. I want the truth, Isaiah said. All of it, whatever it costs. He picked up his coffee cup, both hands around it, looking at her over the rim. The question is whether you want it too. Dorothy Mae Washington had been 63 years old for 4 months and 11 days. She had buried a baby who was apparently not dead. She had survived a marriage to a man capable of something she still could not name without her thoughts flinching away from it. She had rebuilt a life out of materials so modest that she sometimes forgot what she had once been made of. She reached across the table and placed her left wrist next to his right wrist. 2 birthmarks, 2 5-pointed stars, 35 years of distance between them, closing. Tell me everything you know, she said, and then we'll go find the rest. They met 3 more times that week before Isaiah checked out of the penthouse. Twice in the early morning over coffee at a corner table in the hotel's staff cafe before Dot's shift began. Once in the evening at a quiet restaurant in Inman Park where nobody knew either of them. Each time Isaiah brought documents. Each time Dot brought questions. He was methodical in the way that people are methodical when they have learned that emotion, left unstructured, becomes wreckage. He had organized everything into a single leather portfolio. Photocopies of Gloria's handwritten notes, the results of 4 months of private investigation, a timeline constructed from public records, hospital archives, and the careful memory of people who had been paid well enough to remember clearly. Gloria kept journals her whole life, he told her on the second morning, sliding a folder across the small table. 42 years of them. After she passed, I found them in the cedar chest at the bottom of her closet. I didn't read them right away. It felt like... He paused, choosing the word with the precision she was already beginning to recognize as characteristic. Intrusion, even from a son, even after death. He looked at his coffee cup. I read them 6 months after I opened the box, when I finally understood what I was looking for. Dot opened the folder. Inside were photocopies of journal pages. The same careful, slightly shaking penmanship from the note, but younger here, firmer. The entry at the top was dated September 4th, 1989. Harold held him for 2 hours this evening without putting him down. I watched from the kitchen doorway and thought, this is what it was supposed to look like. This is what we were supposed to have. I don't let myself think about the other thing. I can't think about the other thing and also be the mother this child deserves. So I choose. Every morning I wake up and I choose. God forgive me for what I chose to make possible, but not for loving him. I will never ask forgiveness for loving him. Dot read the entry twice, set it down on the table with the same care she used for things that might break. She struggled with it, she said. Her whole life. Isaiah nodded slowly. There are entries every year on March 14th. Every single year until the Alzheimer's took the dates from her. He met Dot's eyes. She never forgot what day it was. March 14th, Isaiah's birthday, the day Dot had spent 35 years marking in her own private way, alone in her apartment with the cedar box open and the Polaroid in her hands, and the particular silence of a woman who has no one to grieve with. She had not known, sitting in that silence year after year, that somewhere in Savannah, a woman was sitting in her own silence, in her own private observance of the same day, carrying the other half of the same wound. Did she ever try to find you? Isaiah said it before she could ask. Yes, twice. The first time in 1994 when I was 5. She hired someone. I found the receipts in the journals. The investigator located a Dorothy Washington in Atlanta, but reported back that the woman had moved, no forwarding address. He looked at her. Was that you? 1994. Dot thought back. That was the year after the divorce. I moved 4 times in 18 months. She exhaled slowly. I was trying to lose myself. You succeeded, he said without judgment. The second time she tried was 2003. She got as far as writing a letter. He slid another photocopy across the table. Dot recognized the format immediately. It was a letter addressed to the real mother of my son, never finished, trailing off mid-sentence as though Gloria had run out of either courage or words. I know what we did was wrong. I knew it the night it happened. Harold doesn't know everything. I have protected him from everything. But I know, and Patricia knows, and the man who arranged it knows. And sometimes I think the child himself knows. The way children know things in their bones before they know them in their minds. He has your... The sentence stopped there. No period, just the edge of the page. He has your... Dot stared at the incomplete sentence for a long time. He has your eyes, she said quietly. Isaiah looked up. That's what she was going to write. Dot touched the edge of the photocopy with one finger. I know because I have thought the same thing every time I look at you. She raised her eyes to his. You have my eyes. Exactly my eyes. Something moved across his face, not the controlled, measured expression she had come to expect, but something underneath it, something younger and less armored. He looked for just a moment like a man who had been solving a puzzle for months and had finally found the piece that made the picture make sense. He looked for just a moment like her son. On the 4th day, Reggie appeared. Dot was crossing the lobby with a tray of afternoon drinks for the garden terrace when she saw him step out of the elevator, and her body knew him before her mind caught up, the way the body always knows the people who have done it damage. Her step faltered. The glasses on the tray chimed softly against each other. Reginald Beaumont Washington was 67 years old and had not suffered the indignity of looking it. His suit was Brioni gray, his shoes were Italian, his hair was the distinguished silver of a man who had decided to stop fighting time and let it make him look distinguished instead. He walked through the Meridian lobby the way he walked through every room he entered, with the unhurried authority of someone who had never had reason to doubt his welcome. Then he saw Dot. They stood 12 feet apart in the marble lobby while Atlanta went about its business around them. 20 years since the divorce was finalized. In that time she had seen him twice. Once at a mutual friend's funeral, once at a distance across Peachtree Street, where she had turned and walked the other direction before he saw her. Both times she had gone home and sat with the cedar box for an hour. Both times she had reminded herself that surviving Reginald Washington was its own form of victory, and that most victories are quiet. This time she did not turn away. Dorothy. His voice was exactly as she remembered it, the deep, deliberate baritone of a man who had spent 30 years making juries believe him. Reginald. I didn't know you worked here. His gaze moved over her uniform, and she watched him absorb the information and immediately begin calculating what it meant for him. There's a lot you don't know about my life, she said pleasantly. Are you staying at the hotel? No, just a meeting. He adjusted his cufflinks, the same Rolex or one indistinguishable from it. Business development. There's a potential client staying here. A pause that had too much weight in it. Isaiah Cole, actually. The tray in Dot's hands was perfectly steady. She had not known she was capable of this, of standing 3 feet from the man who had stolen her child and hearing his name come out of that man's mouth without dropping everything she was holding. But there it was. She was capable of it. 35 years had made her capable of more than she had ever imagined. "Is that right?" she said. Big fish. The small, satisfied smile that had once charmed her completely. Hoping to bring his company on as a client. He seemed to remember himself. "You look well, Dorothy, all things considered." She let that land where it landed. "Thank you, Reginald," she said. "Enjoy your meeting." She walked away. Through the garden terrace doors, set the tray down on a service station where no one was watching, pressed both palms flat against the wall, and breathed through her nose for 10 seconds. "He's meeting Isaiah. Today. Right now in this building, Reginald Washington is sitting across a table from the son he sold." She took out her phone and sent a 2-word text to the number Isaiah had given her. "He's here." 3 seconds later, her phone buzzed. "I know. Stay calm. I'll explain tonight." That evening they met at a small jazz club in Sweet Auburn that Isaiah had chosen. Low lighting, good acoustics, booths with high wooden backs that created the illusion of privacy. He was already there when she arrived, sitting with his back to the wall the way her father had always sat, watching the door. He waited until she had her tea before he spoke. "I knew Washington was coming today," he said. "I've known for 3 weeks." Dot set down her cup. "You knew?" "His firm reached out to Coal Energy months ago before I started looking for you. When I found out who he was in relation to you, I didn't cancel the meeting." He turned his water glass slowly on the table. "I needed to see him. I needed to sit across from him and know whether he recognized anything in my face." "Did he?" Isaiah was quiet for a moment. In the front of the club, the pianist was playing something slow and intricate. "Thelonious Monk, Round Midnight." "No," he said finally. "Not even a flicker." He spent 45 minutes talking about regulatory frameworks and the superior track record of Washington and Associates. He looked at me the entire time and saw nothing but a potential client. He paused. "Either he doesn't know what his own son looks like, or he is the finest actor I have ever encountered in 35 years of business negotiations." "He knows," Dot said quietly. "Reggie always knows. He's just very good at making himself believe he doesn't." She looked down at her tea. "I used to think that was a kind of strength. It took me a long time to understand it was the worst kind of cowardice." Isaiah nodded slowly. Then, "Tell me about him, about your marriage." So she did. She told it the way she had never told it before. Not in pieces to therapists, not in careful omissions to friends, but whole, from the beginning. She told him about meeting Reggie at a fundraiser in 1984, when she was 23 and teaching music at a middle school in Decatur, and he was a 30-year-old attorney with a gift for making you feel like the most important person in a crowded room. She told him about the marriage in 1985, the early years that had been genuinely good. She believed that still. She had never stopped believing that they had been genuinely good. And the slow erosion that followed as Reggie's career grew larger and her own life was gradually, gracefully, expertly minimized. She told him about the pregnancy, about Reggie's face when she told him, not angry precisely, just suddenly careful in a way that frightened her, about the things he had said in the months that followed, each one reasonable on its surface, each one a careful brick in a wall he was building around the possibility of this child. "The timing isn't right. My partnership track is critical right now. A premature baby, Dorothy, with all the complications that involves. We need to think about what that would mean for our lives." She told him about the night of March 14th. "I went into labor at 26 weeks, she said. "I called Reggie from the hospital. His secretary said he was in trial and couldn't be reached." She took a sip of tea, steadying herself. "I labored alone for 11 hours. The nurses were kind. Dr. Holloway was there when he arrived. Our baby." She stopped, reorganized herself. "He cried when they placed him in my arms. He was so small, but he was there, completely there, alert. He looked at me." Her voice thinned but did not break. "He looked at me like he had been waiting his whole short life for that specific moment." Isaiah was very still across the table. "They let me hold him for 3 hours. Then Dr. Holloway came back. She had a particular look on her face. I have thought about that look for 35 years. Not grief. something more controlled than grief. Dot looked up. She said he hadn't made it. She said it happens with preemies this early. She said she was deeply sorry. A long pause, and then she handed me a bundle, and I held it and said goodbye to my son. The monk piece ended. A soft ripple of applause moved through the front of the club. Then silence. "She didn't hand you me," Isaiah said. "No," Dot said. "She did not hand me you." They sat with that for a long moment, the specific, unspeakable cruelty of what it meant. "I want to see her," Dot said. "Before anything else, before any legal decisions, before we confront Reggie. I need to hear it from her directly." She met Isaiah's eyes. "Can you find her?" "I already have," he said. "She's in a retirement community in Savannah. She's 74. Early-stage memory issues, but her doctors say she has clear days." He reached across the table and placed a folded piece of paper in front of her. "I thought you'd want to go." She unfolded the paper. An address, Savannah, Georgia, Magnolia Gardens Retirement Community. "When?" she asked. "Tomorrow," he said. "If you're ready." She had not been ready for 35 years. She was not sure ready was the relevant question anymore. "I'll be outside my building at 7, she said. The drive to Savannah took 3 hours on I-16, through flat Georgia farmland that turned slowly golden in the October light. Isaiah drove his own car, a modest dark blue sedan, nothing like what she would have expected from a man of his resources. When she mentioned it, he shrugged. "Conspicuous cars are for people who need to be seen," he said. "I already know who I am." They talked. Not about Holloway, not about Reggie, not about what waited for them in Savannah. They talked the way people talk when they are learning each other and know that what they are learning matters. Carefully, with genuine curiosity, leaving room for the other person to not answer if they chose. She learned that he had perfect pitch, had always had it, since he was very small. Gloria had discovered it when he was 3, sitting at the piano in the family room and picking out hymns he had only heard once. She had immediately enrolled him in lessons. Harold had wanted baseball. Gloria would not be moved on the piano. Dot was quiet for a moment after he told her that. "I taught music for 12 years, she said. He glanced at her. "I know. I read every profile I could find on Dorothy Mae Washington of Atlanta." A pause. "There wasn't much. You disappeared fairly thoroughly after the divorce." "I was trying to." She looked out at the farmland going past. "For a while I thought if I could just be small enough, quiet enough, the pain would stop noticing me." "Did it work?" "No," she said. "Pain is not impressed by invisibility." She turned back to him. "Do you still play? Piano?" "Badly and infrequently," he said. "But yes." She almost smiled. He almost smiled. They both looked back at the road. Magnolia Gardens was exactly what its name suggested. Low buildings arranged around a central garden, everything clean and well-maintained and faintly melancholy in the way of places that specialize in the end of things. A staff member met them at reception and led them through a corridor that smelled of disinfectant and carnations to a sunroom at the back of the building. Patricia Ann Holloway was seated by the window. She was 74 years old, and time had done what it does, reducing her to something fine and lightweight. She had been a tall woman. Dot remembered that from the hospital. Now she sat in the chair like something held together more by habit than structure. White hair, hands folded in her lap, pale eyes that turned toward them with the mild curiosity of someone who has stopped expecting visitors. Then those pale eyes found Dot, and something happened in them that was not mild and was not curiosity. "Dr. Holloway," Isaiah said, his voice calm and unhurried. "My name is Isaiah Cole. This is Dorothy Washington. We'd like to talk with you about something that happened at Grady Memorial in March of 1989. Patricia Holloway looked at Dot for a long moment. Then she closed her eyes. When she opened them, the vague pleasantness had gone entirely. "Sit down," she said. Her voice was steadier than Dot expected. The voice of a woman who had been waiting to have this conversation for 35 years and had perhaps, in some exhausted corner of herself, been relieved when it finally arrived. "I'll tell you what you want to know. I have been telling it in my head for decades. Might as well finally say it out loud." She told them without drama, without self-pity, without the elaborate self-justifications that Dot had spent the drive down steeling herself against. She told them the way people tell the truth when they are very old and very tired, and the weight of what they carry has become indistinguishable from themselves. Reginald Washington had called her office 2 weeks before Dot's due date. He had been monitoring the pregnancy closely enough to know it was going badly, that the baby was coming early. That early meant risk. That risk gave him an argument he had been carefully constructing since the day Dot refused to consider his suggestions about the pregnancy. He did not ask Holloway to do anything specific in that first call. He was too smart for that. He simply presented a hypothetical. In a case like this, he had said, where a premature infant presents significant challenges and the father is, let's say, unprepared for what that would mean for his family, what options exist? Holloway had referred him to Gloria and Harold Cole. She had known them through the Savannah medical community. Harold had served on the board of the hospital system where Holloway had admitting privileges. She knew they had recently lost an infant adopted through official channels, a little boy with a congenital heart condition who had lived 4 months. She knew Gloria was not recovering. She had seen it at an event in February, the particular blankness of a woman whose grief had stopped fitting inside her body. She had made the introduction. "I told myself it was creative problem-solving," Holloway said, her voice dry in the way of someone who has long ago lost patience with her own excuses. 2 problems with 1 solution. A father who didn't want a child, a couple who desperately needed one, and me, in the middle, with a medical license I had been foolish enough to put at risk with a filing error 6 years earlier that Washington somehow knew about. She looked at her folded hands. He didn't have to threaten me directly. He was too clever for that. He simply mentioned it in passing, the way you mention the weather. And I understood. I understood. The phrase dropped into the sunroom and settled there. "The night of March 14th, Dot said. Her voice was very quiet. "Walk me through the night of March 14th. Holloway looked at her with something complicated in her eyes. Guilt, yes, but also a strange, painful tenderness, the tenderness of someone who had watched a person grieve from a safe distance for 35 years and had never been able to stop watching. "The delivery was normal," she said. "Complicated by the prematurity, but the baby was strong, stronger than we expected. His lungs were underdeveloped but functioning. With proper NICU care, he had excellent odds." She paused. "We had that conversation, Washington and I, when I called him from the hospital at 3 in the morning. He said to proceed as planned." "And Gloria?" Isaiah asked. "Gloria arrived at 4:30. She came in through the service entrance, using a staff badge Harold had arranged through his contacts on the hospital board." Holloway's voice had gone flat, the flatness of recitation, of facts so long rehearsed they had worn smooth. "She held the baby in the supply room off the NICU while I went to tell you." She looked at Dot. "While I went to tell you that he hadn't made it." The sunroom was very bright. Outside the window, the garden was full of October color, orange and red, and a particular gold that belonged only to Georgia in the fall. Dot stood up, not dramatically, not with tears or raised voice. She simply stood, because her body needed to be vertical, needed to feel the floor under her feet, needed the basic physics of standing upright. She walked to the window, pressed her palm flat against the glass. 35 years. She had marked every March 14th, had sat with the cedar box, had carried the particular loneliness of a grief that had no community, because people understood losing a spouse, losing a parent, even losing a child to illness. But there was no language for what she had carried, because what she had carried was not real. It was a story someone had written for her without her consent, and she had lived inside it so long she had stopped being able to see the walls. She felt Isaiah come to stand beside her. He didn't touch her. He was learning her, learning what she needed and what she didn't, with the same careful attention he brought to everything. After a long moment, she raised her left wrist and he raised his right wrist, and she pressed the 2 birthmarks together, the 2 5-pointed stars, dark against their respective skin, and she felt, physically felt, some circuit completing itself, some current that had been broken for 35 years suddenly running whole. She did not cry. She had cried enough, in the dark and alone, for a lifetime. What she felt now was something different, not softer than grief, but deeper. The feeling of a woman who has finally reached the bottom of something and found that the bottom holds. "I forgive you," she said to the window, not to Holloway, not to Reggie, to herself. To the 28-year-old woman in the Polaroid who had believed them because believing had seemed like the only option. "I forgive you," she said, "for not knowing." Then she turned around. "All right," she said to Isaiah, to Holloway, who sat small and old and wrung out in her chair by the window, to the autumn light and the Savannah garden and the 35 years behind her. "All right, now we decide what comes next." The DNA results came back in 72 hours. Isaiah had arranged the testing through a private laboratory in Atlanta. Discreet, fast, the kind of service available to people who could pay for discretion and speed. They had given samples before leaving Savannah in a small clinic Isaiah's assistant had located. The swabs had been sent by courier the same afternoon. Dot went back to work. She moved through her shifts with the quality of attention that comes when the mind is fully occupied elsewhere. Precise in her movements, courteous to the guests, internally elsewhere entirely. Beverly watched her with the careful non-intrusion of a true friend, which meant she said nothing but made sure Dot's section was manageable and that there was always fresh coffee in the break room. On the evening of the third day, Beverly appeared beside her during service with a particular expression. "You have a message from Mr. Cole." The message was 3 words. "It's confirmed. Tonight." She went to his Atlanta apartment, a clean, spare space in Midtown that looked like a man lived and worked in it rather than performed living in it. No art chosen for impressiveness, no furniture chosen for status, books on every surface, a whiteboard covered in diagrams, a kitchen that smelled of actual use. He handed her the paperwork across the kitchen island. She read the relevant line 3 times, though she had known what it would say since the sunroom in Savannah. 99.9997% probability of first-degree maternal biological relationship. "There it is," she said. "There it is," he agreed. They were quiet for a moment. Outside the apartment windows, Atlanta glittered in the early November evening. "Reggie next," she said. "Reggie next," he confirmed. "I should tell you something. When I met with him at the hotel, I told him I was still considering his firm for a contract. I suggested a follow-up meeting this week." He met her eyes. "I used his greed as a scheduling tool. I'm not apologizing for it." Dot almost laughed. "Isaiah." "Yes?" "I raised you right," she said. "Even though I didn't raise you." This time he did smile, fully, for only the second time she had seen it, and it rearranged his entire face into something younger and warmer and so familiar that she had to look away for a moment. Late that night, after they had gone over every document, every piece of evidence, every decision still to be made, Isaiah paused at the door as Dot was preparing to leave. "There's one more thing," he said. "I should have told you this earlier, but I wanted the DNA confirmed first." He was quiet for a moment, choosing words precisely. "The investigator I hired found something in the hospital records. A witness signature on your son's death certificate. A nurse named Sandra Faye Tatum, listed as the attending witness on the night of March 14th. Dot waited. There was no nurse by that name on Grady Memorial's staff in March of 1989, or any other month. He looked at her steadily. "My document analyst compared the signature to every piece of notarized paperwork we have connected to Gloria Cole." Dot understood before he finished the sentence. "It was her signature," she said. "Yes," Isaiah said. "Gloria was in that hospital. She signed a death certificate for a child she was holding alive in a supply room 40 feet away." He paused. "She was there, Dot. She signed her false name, and then she walked out of Grady Memorial with me." Dot stood in his doorway and felt the full architecture of what had been done to her. Not just Reggie's transaction, not just Holloway's cowardice, but Gloria, who had loved Isaiah genuinely and completely, who had written in her journals every March 14th, who had left the box and the note. Gloria, who had also stood in a hospital corridor and signed a false name on a death certificate and walked out into the March morning with another woman's living child. "She loved you," Dot said finally. "I know," Isaiah said. "And she did this." "Yes," he said. "Both things. Both things." Dot stood in the doorway of her son's apartment and understood, perhaps for the first time, the full complexity of what forgiveness would actually require. Not of Reggie, whose wrong was clear and cold, but of Gloria, who had been capable simultaneously of genuine love and genuine harm, and who had left her son a box with a key because she could not find another way to live with what she knew. "She left you the box," Dot said. "She made sure you could find me." Eventually, he said. In her way, yes. They looked at each other across the threshold. All right, Dot said. Tomorrow we go see Reggie. The offices of Washington and Associates occupied the 32nd floor of a glass tower on Peachtree Center Avenue. Exactly the kind of address Reginald Washington had spent his entire adult life engineering for himself. The lobby downstairs had marble floors and a security desk staffed by men in blazers. Everything about the building said, "You do not arrive here by accident." Dot and Isaiah arrived on a Tuesday morning at 10 o'clock without an appointment. The receptionist, a young woman, composed and pleasant, trained to manage the unexpected without showing she was managing it, looked up with a professional smile that flickered only slightly when Isaiah Cole set his business card on her desk. Mr. Cole, Mr. Washington is currently in a meeting. If you'd like to schedule, tell him it's time sensitive, Isaiah said. Quiet, certain, not unkind. 2 minutes later, she was leading them down a corridor lined with framed commendations and the photographs that powerful men always hang in their offices, shaking hands with governors, standing at podiums, receiving awards in wood-paneled rooms. Dot had stood beside the man in some of them, younger, smiling for cameras at galas she had organized. She did not look at the photographs now. The conference room door opened. Reginald Washington was standing at the window when they entered, phone to his ear, ending his call. He turned as the door closed behind them. He saw Dot first. A flicker, quickly controlled, but there. Then he looked at Isaiah. Then he looked back at Dot. Then he looked at Isaiah again. And Dot watched it happen. Watched the moment arrive in his face the way weather arrives, the sky changing its character before the rain begins. He was 67 years old and had spent 35 years being very good at not knowing things he had decided not to know. But there are limits to what even the most disciplined mind can refuse when the evidence is standing in front of it wearing her eyes. Dorothy. His voice was careful. This is unexpected. Sit down, Reginald, she said. He sat. Isaiah placed the leather portfolio on the conference table and opened it without theater. He laid out the documents one by one. The DNA results, Holloway's recorded statement, Gloria's journal entries, the hospital death certificate with Gloria's forged signature, the bank records showing $47,000 withdrawn in structured amounts across 14 days in late February and early March of 1989. Each document landed on the polished mahogany surface like a stone dropped into still water. Reggie did not touch any of them. He looked at each in turn with the expression of a man reading a case file, assessing, organizing, calculating. The lawyer's reflex. Dot had always found it remarkable, that reflex. It had taken her years to understand it was not composure. It was the way he kept himself from being present in moments that required him to be present. These are serious allegations, he said. They are serious facts, Isaiah said. The allegations phase has passed. Reggie's eyes moved to Dot. You arranged this. We arranged this, she said. The plural was deliberate. Something shifted in his face at the word we. She watched him absorb for the first time the full reality of what was sitting across the table from him. Not his ex-wife with a grievance, not a business adversary with leverage. His son. The son he had sold for $47,000 and a clear partnership track, sitting in a midtown conference room in a suit that cost more than Reggie's first car, looking at him with eyes that were not his own. What do you want? Reggie asked. His voice had lost some of its deliberateness. I want to know why, Dot said. The room was very quiet. Not the legal answer, she continued. Not the answer you'd give a jury. I want to know why you sat in a parking lot outside Grady Memorial for 3 hours. She watched his face. Yes, I know you were there. I want to know why you sat in that parking lot and made that call, and then drove home and bought white roses and walked into my hospital room and held me while I cried. Her voice was even, completely, absolutely even. I want to know what you told yourself it was. Reginald Washington looked at his hands on the conference table, the Rolex on his left wrist, the hands of a man whose particular kind of harm had always been accomplished with paperwork and phone calls. I told myself it was the best available outcome, he said, for everyone. For you. For everyone. He looked up. You were 28 years old, Dorothy. Your career was still possible. A premature baby with potential complications. The doctors, Isaiah said, his voice cutting cleanly through the room, were Holloway, who you had paid and coerced. There were no other doctors. There was no other prognosis. You constructed the medical reality you needed to justify the decision you had already made. He paused. I was healthy. My lungs were functioning. I spent 4 days in a NICU in Savannah and went home with Gloria and Harold Cole. I had a cold once when I was 7. That was the extent of my medical complications. Reggie was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice had changed. Not collapsed. Reginald Washington did not collapse. But something in the architecture of it had changed. The way a very old building changes when one load-bearing element is finally removed. It does not fall. It simply becomes something different from what it was. I was in the parking lot for 3 hours, he said. Yes, he looked at the table. I sat there and I thought about what I was doing. I knew what I was doing. I made myself know it. I thought it would be important later, not to be someone who had deceived himself about what he was doing. A long pause. I decided that the life the child would have with the Coles was better than the life he would have with me, with a father who didn't want him. He looked up at Isaiah. Was I wrong about that? The question fell into the room with an almost physical weight. Isaiah looked at him for a long moment. Harold Cole taught me to fish, he said finally. He drove me to every science fair from 5th grade through high school. He cried at my college graduation. He paused. He was my father. He was a good man. You had nothing to do with that. He leaned forward slightly. But you also had nothing to do with it. You made a decision about 2 other people's lives, and you dressed it up as generosity because that was the only costume that fit. A pause. My mother spent 35 years marking my birthday in her journal. Alone, because you decided she couldn't cope. Dot had not cried in Holloway's sunroom. She did not cry now, but she felt something move through her chest, something large and slow, like weather moving through a landscape, changing everything it touched. I was afraid, Reggie said. The words seemed to cost him something real. Of what it would require, of the kind of man it would make necessary for me to become. He looked at Dot. You were always stronger than I was. I knew that from the beginning. I think I was afraid that if we had a child together, you would both show me what I was. And what were you? Dot asked. He didn't answer. Reginald. Her voice was not angry. It was something past anger, something that anger eventually becomes when it has been carried long enough and far enough. What were you? Not enough, he said quietly. I was not enough, and I was too afraid to try to be. The silence lasted long enough to become its own kind of answer. Then Isaiah slid the final document across the table, prepared in advance by his legal team, reviewed by Dot's attorney, Constance Ruth Albright, who had practiced family law in Atlanta for 28 years and had said when she read the brief, "Whatever you need, I'm here." The terms were not punitive. That had been Dot's choice, and Isaiah had honored it without question. Reggie would provide a full notarized confession of his role in the events of March 1989, sealed held by Constance Albright's office, to be released to law enforcement and media only in the event of noncompliance. He would make a substantial financial contribution to a foundation that Dot and Isaiah were establishing. He would resign from 3 civic boards on which he currently served, and he would sign a legal acknowledgement, private, never to be filed publicly unless he chose otherwise, recognizing Isaiah Damon Cole as his biological son. That last item was Dot's addition, made at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night at Isaiah's kitchen table, when he had already thought the document was final. She had picked up the pen and written it in the margin. Isaiah had read it, looked at her, and called his attorney. It's not for you, she had explained. It's for the record. Somewhere in a file, the truth exists on paper. That's all. Reggie read the document. He read the final clause twice. Then he set it down. I'll need my attorney to review this, he said. Of course, Isaiah said. You have 48 hours. They left without another word. In the elevator going down, neither of them spoke. 32 floors of silence, and then the marble lobby, and then Atlanta, open and indifferent around them. The city continuing its business as it always does, regardless of what has just changed in the lives of the people moving through it. Dot took 2 personal days from the Meridian. Beverly approved them without questions, which meant Beverly understood more than she was saying, which was characteristic of Beverly, who had always understood more than she said. Dot spent the first morning at her piano, not practicing toward anything in particular, just playing the way she had played in the very beginning, before music became something she was good at and therefore something that carried expectation. She played hymns from childhood. She played the Schubert pieces she had loved at the conservatory. She played a Stevie Wonder song her mother had hummed while cooking on Sunday afternoons, picking it out by ear the way she had always been able to do, following the melody home. Isaiah called each evening. The calls had begun as briefings, updates on legal matters, questions about the foundation documents, and had gradually become something else. They talked about things unrelated to the case. He told her about a solar installation project in rural Georgia, bringing reliable power to communities that had gone without for too long. She told him about a student she'd had in her second year of teaching, a girl named Precious Elaine Ford, 11 years old, who had arrived in her classroom unable to read music and had left at year's end playing simple Bach. "I wonder where she is now," Dot said. "People like that don't disappear," Isaiah said. "They just become harder to track." On the second evening, he arrived at her apartment carrying food he had cooked himself. Red beans and rice, dense and fragrant and deeply southern, from Gloria's recipe. They ate at her small kitchen table. He looked at the upright piano against the wall with the expression he always had when he looked at it. "Play something," he said. "I always end up playing when you ask that." "I know." He did not apologize for it. She played Chopin, the Nocturne in B-flat minor, which she had loved since she was 19, and which had the particular quality of music that knows things about grief that language doesn't. When she finished, the apartment was very quiet. "Gloria used to play recordings of the nocturnes when she couldn't sleep," Isaiah said, looking at his hands on the table. "I'd hear it through the walls at 2 a.m. and lie in bed listening and feel—" He stopped. "I never knew what to call the feeling. Safe, maybe. Like the music was holding the house together." Dot looked at him across the small table. "She was trying to give you something," she said, "that she knew came from somewhere she couldn't fully explain." He was quiet for a moment. "Do you believe that?" "I believe people are capable of doing terrible things, and also of loving genuinely," she said. "I have lived 63 years, and that is the truest thing I know. It doesn't excuse the terrible things, but it's true." Isaiah nodded slowly, then quietly. "I have been thinking about what I want to call you." Dot waited. "Not for anyone else's benefit," he said. "For mine." He looked up. "I have been calling you Dorothy in my head, but that's not what you are to me." A pause. "I don't know if I can say Mom yet. The word has 35 years of a different face on it." "I know," she said gently. "But I'm working toward it," he said. "I want you to know that." She reached across the kitchen table and covered his hand with hers. The 2 birthmarks side by side, her left, his right. 2 stars. "Take all the time you need," she said. "We have time now." The 48 hours expired on a Thursday morning. At 9 o'clock, a courier arrived at Constance Albright's office with a sealed envelope from Washington & Associates. Inside was the signed confession, all terms accepted, every clause initialed, and paper-clipped to the back, not required by the agreement, not asked for, not expected, was a smaller envelope addressed in Reggie's handwriting to Dorothy Mae Washington. Inside were photographs, 23 of them, spanning 1984 to 1989. Their wedding, a vacation in Charleston, Dot at her piano at a school recital, Dot in the backyard of their Buckhead house with the azaleas in bloom, the ultrasound image from week 22. He had kept them. Through the divorce, through 20 years of a life carefully constructed to minimize what he had done, he had kept them in a drawer somewhere, and now he had sent them back. Dot sat with them spread across her kitchen table for a long time. She thought about what it meant, that a man capable of what Reggie had done was also capable of keeping these photographs for 35 years. She thought about whether that made him more human or less. She thought about Gloria, who had done something unforgivable, and also loved Isaiah completely, and also left him a box with a key. She thought about Holloway, who had chosen her career over a newborn, and had spent the rest of her life unable to fully forget the child's face. She was surrounded, she realized, by people who had done terrible things, and also been human. The world was full of them. She had been so focused for so long on the terrible things that she had sometimes forgotten the human part was real too, that it didn't cancel the harm, but that it was there, alongside the harm, in the complicated tangle of what people actually are. She gathered the photographs carefully, Put them back in the envelope. Put the envelope in the cedar box, next to the Polaroid and the hospital bracelet and the lock of fine dark hair. Then she picked up her phone and called Isaiah. "It's done," she said. "I know," he said. "Constance called me. He sent photographs. Of us. Before." A pause. "He kept them all this time." "Yes," she said. Isaiah was quiet for a moment. "How do you feel?" She thought about it honestly, the way she had been trying to think about everything honestly since the morning she had pressed their birthmarks together and decided that the time for managing her own feelings was over. "I feel," she said slowly, "like I understand human beings a little better than I did yesterday. And I'm not sure that is comfortable, but I think it might be important." "Yes," Isaiah said. "I think it might be." They named it the Isaiah Star Foundation. The name had been Isaiah's suggestion, offered quietly one evening over Constance Albright's conference table while they were reviewing incorporation documents, and Dot had felt something move in her chest when he said it. Not sentimentality, something sturdier than that. The recognition of a thing being named correctly. The mission was specific: legal advocacy and psychological support for mothers separated from their children through medical fraud, coercive adoption practices, or failures of the child welfare system. The legal architecture was Isaiah's domain. The human architecture, the understanding of what these women needed, what they had lost, what recovery actually looked like when it was honest rather than performed, was Dot's. Beverly Okafor became the executive director. Isaiah had offered this position after meeting Beverly once, for 45 minutes, over coffee in Dot's apartment. He had watched Beverly manage 3 separate interruptions during those 45 minutes without losing the thread of the conversation or showing any sign of strain. When Beverly left, he looked at Dot and said simply, "Her." "I was going to suggest her," Dot said. "I know. I could tell." He almost smiled. "We think alike." "Don't let it go to your head," she said. Beverly accepted the position with the composure of a woman who had been consistently underestimated and had learned to receive appropriate recognition with something that looked like calm, but was in fact carefully contained joy. She sat with the offer for 24 hours, called Dot at 11 o'clock at night to ask 3 precise questions about governance structure, received 3 precise answers, and called back at 7 the next morning to say yes. Dot gave her notice at the Meridian on a Friday afternoon. She had worked out her final shift, changed out of her uniform for the last time, and was walking through the lobby toward the exit when she stopped. She looked around at the marble floors, the chandelier, the guests moving through with their luggage, and their lives she had briefly orbited for 12 years. She thought about this woman who had first walked through these doors, 51 years old, resume in hand, wearing her dignity like armor, because it was the only thing Reggie hadn't been able to take in the settlement. She thought about what that woman had needed and what that woman had become. She walked out into the Atlanta afternoon, and she did not look back. 3 weeks passed. Purposeful weeks, forward-moving weeks, the kind that feel different from the ones before because finally they are going somewhere. Then one cool Saturday morning in late November, Isaiah called. "Are you free this afternoon?" "Yes." "There's somewhere I'd like to go." A pause. "With you, if you're willing." She knew before he said it. They were almost at Westview Cemetery when Isaiah told her about Reggie. "I heard from him last week," he said, eyes on the road. "He didn't ask for anything. He wanted me to know that he had arranged for the grave to be tended professionally, on a regular schedule. He said he should have done it years ago." Dot looked at the road ahead. "He has been paying for it since 1989, Isaiah said quietly. "The cemetery records show a standing account, anonymous donor, paying for maintenance on that plot every year since it was placed." He glanced at her. It was him, the whole time. She sat with that. A man capable of selling his newborn son had also, for 35 years, paid in secret to keep a small grave tended. A man who had never visited, never acknowledged, never allowed himself to fully know what he knew, had nonetheless made sure that somewhere in Atlanta, a stone with his son's name on it was kept clean, and the grass around it was cut, and in spring there were flowers. Both things, she thought. Always both things. "I don't know what to do with that," she said. "Neither do I," Isaiah said. "I think that might be okay." The grave was under a flowering dogwood that had not been there 35 years ago. The cemetery had planted it sometime in the intervening years, and it had grown into a full canopy. The grass around the small headstone was neatly kept. Someone had placed a single pot of yellow pansies at the base. Isaiah Washington, beloved son, March 14th, 1989. Dot stood in front of it for a long time. Isaiah stood beside her. He reached into his jacket pocket and took out a small, smooth stone. Gray River granite, chosen for a reason she didn't ask about, and placed it on top of the headstone. The gesture was deliberate and quiet, and she recognized it immediately from the tradition Harold had observed, passed to him by his closest friend. I was here. I remember. Your name, she said. My name, he agreed. You gave it to me. Nobody took that. She reached out and placed her hand on the cool surface of the stone. Isaiah, she had chosen it before he was born, because it meant salvation, and because she had believed, even then, in things that hadn't happened yet. I talked to you, she said quietly. On this day, every year, I'd come here and tell you what was happening. The divorce, the hotel, small things, when Beverly's daughter was born, when I finally learned to make my grandmother's sweet potato pie properly. She paused. I thought I was talking to a grave. You were talking to me, Isaiah said. She looked at him. The dogwood above them released a small shower of white petals in the late autumn breeze, landing on the shoulders of his jacket, catching in his hair. I know that now, she said. Later, in the car heading back toward Atlanta, Isaiah reached into the back seat and retrieved a small package wrapped in brown paper. Gloria left this with the box, he said. Separate from everything else. I didn't open it until last week because I didn't know what it was for. He held it out to her. I think I know now. She unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a piece of sheet music, handwritten, not printed. An original transcription in a careful, educated hand of Precious Lord, Take My Hand, the Thomas Dorsey hymn. At the top, in the same handwriting, for Isaiah, when he finds his way home, and for the woman who first called him by name. Below that, in smaller letters, dated February 2018, 3 months before Gloria died. I could not give her back what I took. I could only make sure the path stayed open. Dot held the sheet music in both hands and looked at it for a long time. Gloria Cole had never met her, had seen her once, perhaps, from a distance in a hospital corridor in the early hours of March 15th, 1989. A young woman heavily sedated, holding a bundle, saying goodbye to a child who was not dead. And for the remaining 29 years of her life, she had carried that image, and she had written in her journals every March 14th, and she had taught her son to play piano because she believed somewhere in her bones that music was the thing that would eventually connect what she had broken. She had not been wrong. She knew, Dot said, about the music, about what it would mean. She knew a lot of things she couldn't say, Isaiah said. I think that was the tragedy of her. Dot folded the sheet music carefully and placed it in her lap. Outside the car windows, Georgia countryside moved past in the November afternoon, fields and tree lines and the particular quality of late autumn southern light that makes everything look more honest than it did before. I'm going to play this, she said. At the launch. I know, Isaiah said. I was hoping you would. 3 days, she thought, looking down at Gloria's handwriting. She practiced every morning and every evening, and each time she played it, it sounded less like a hymn she was learning and more like something she had always known. 3 days before the foundation launch, Dot received a call from a number she didn't recognize. Dorothy, Reggie's voice, older than she remembered it sounding, even from their meeting last month. She waited. I was wondering if I might attend the launch. A pause. Not as anyone, not to be acknowledged. Another pause. Longer, the kind that happens when a man who has spent his life controlling language finally runs out of the right words. I would like to see him. Just once. From a distance. I'm not asking for anything. I understand I have no right to ask. She was quiet for a long moment. I'll ask Isaiah, she said. She called Isaiah and told him what Reggie had asked. She said, It's your decision. Completely. Isaiah was quiet on the other end of the line long enough that she thought the call might have dropped. Then, he can come. He can stand in the back. He can leave when it's over and we will not acknowledge him. A pause. But I want him to hear you play. I want him to understand clearly and completely what 35 years of his choices actually produced. Not as punishment, as information. That's very measured of you, Dot said. I've had a good teacher, he said. Recently, Jerusalem Baptist Church had stood on the same corner in southwest Atlanta since 1923. The building had been renovated twice and enlarged once, but the sanctuary still had the bones of the original construction: high wooden ceilings, tall clear windows that let in the afternoon light without filtering it, pews worn smooth by a century of Sunday mornings. The organ was the same instrument installed in 1961, maintained and repaired over the decades but never replaced, because there are some things a congregation decides collectively not to replace. Dot had played this organ every Sunday for 20 years. She sat at the bench and adjusted the stops and placed Gloria's handwritten sheet music on the rack and looked out at the sanctuary. It was full. Beverly had done her work. The foundation launch had drawn community leaders, legal advocates, social workers, the journalists Isaiah had selectively invited. It had drawn women who had been separated from their children. It had drawn their children, some middle-aged now, some still young, all of them carrying the particular quality of people who have survived something that was not supposed to be survived. In the front pew, Isaiah sat with Constance Albright and Beverly's husband. He was in a dark suit and looking at his hands in his lap in the way he did when he was collecting himself. In the very back of the sanctuary, near the doors, a man in a gray suit stood with his hat in his hands. He did not sit. He did not speak to anyone. He simply stood and looked forward as the sanctuary filled around him. Dot looked at him once. Then she looked away. She placed her hands on the keys. "Precious Lord, take my hand," she began. "Lead me on. Let me stand." The organ filled the sanctuary the way organs fill spaces, not from the front or the back, but from everywhere at once. From the walls and the floor and the high wooden ceiling. From the 63 years of grief and the 12 years of invisibility and the 35 years of talking to a grave and the months of finding her way back to the living. She played it the way she believed Thomas Dorsey had written it, not as a song of sorrow, but as a song of someone who has been through enough sorrow to know that it ends, not in death. In the morning, through the storm, through the night, lead me on to the light. When she reached the final verse, she heard it. The thing that happens in a room full of people when music touches something they had given up hoping could still be touched. A collective stillness. The specific silence that is not the absence of sound, but the presence of attention, the whole room leaning in, listening with something deeper than their ears. She held the final chord until it had said everything it needed to say. Then she lifted her hands. The silence lasted long enough to be its own kind of answer. Then someone in the back began to clap, slowly, once, twice, and the sanctuary came back to itself, the applause building from the back forward, people rising to their feet. And Dot sat at the organ with her hands in her lap and looked out at the room she had played in for 20 years, the room she had left and returned to, the room that had held her losses and now held this. Isaiah was standing in the front pew. He was not applauding. He was looking at her with an expression she recognized, not because she had seen it on his face before, but because she had seen it in the mirror 35 years ago, in the hours before they told her what they told her. The expression of someone who has just understood something about the world that they will not be able to ununderstand. He walked to the front of the sanctuary, turned to face the room, took the microphone from the stand. "My name is Isaiah Damon Cole," he said. His voice was steady. Everything about him was steady. The posture, the gaze, the hands holding the microphone at exactly the right angle. "I was born at Grady Memorial Hospital in Atlanta on March 14th, 1989. I weighed 3 pounds and 4 ounces, and I apparently had opinions about arriving early." A ripple of soft laughter moved through the room. "I was raised by Harold and Gloria Cole of Savannah, Georgia, who were good parents in every way that matters. Harold taught me to fish and to keep my word and to measure a man by what he does when no one is watching. Gloria taught me to play piano and to read carefully and to believe that love is an action, not a feeling." He paused. "I owe them everything I was able to become." He looked toward the organ. "The woman who just played was not able to raise me," he said. "That was not her choice. For 35 years she believed I was gone. She built a life anyway. She kept her dignity when it would have been easier to let it go. She walked into a room one October evening and recognized a birthmark on a stranger's wrist and did not look away." He stopped. "Her name is Dorothy Mae Washington. She is my mother. And I am—" His voice, controlled for 35 years of board meetings and negotiations and the hard, specific work of becoming someone, shifted just slightly, in the way that voices shift when something true is being said for the first time out loud. I am very grateful to be her son. Dot sat at the organ bench and did not try to stop what came to her eyes. In the back of the sanctuary, the man in the gray suit stood with his hat in his hands and looked at the floor. He stood for another minute. Then he put on his hat and walked quietly through the doors and out into the Atlanta afternoon. Dot did not watch him go. She was already looking at her son. The dogwood in Westview had not yet bloomed. It was February, and the branches were still bare, holding their blossoms for the warmth that hadn't arrived yet. But the grave beneath it was tended. It was always tended. Dot brought a small pot of primroses, early blooming, pale yellow, the color of cautious hope. She grew them herself now, on the balcony of the apartment she had moved into after leaving the Meridian. Isaiah had found it, sent her the listing one morning with a text that said, "South-facing windows, room for a piano, reasonable commute to Jerusalem Baptist." Thoughts? She had moved in 6 weeks later. She set the primroses at the base of the headstone and stood for a moment in the gray February light. Isaiah Washington, beloved son, March 14th, 1989. "Hey, baby," she said softly, the way she always started, the greeting she had used for 35 years of visiting a grave that was not a grave, talking to a child who was not gone. "He's doing well," she said. "The foundation helped 43 families last year. Beverly says we'll double that this year. He's talking about expanding to 3 more states." She smiled at the stone. "He works too hard. I tell him so. He listens about as well as I expect, which is to say he hears me, and then continues working too hard." She paused. "He sounds like me. I'm told that's my fault." She heard footsteps on the path behind her. Isaiah came and stood beside her, hands in his pockets. He had driven up from a morning meeting. She could tell by the jacket still on, the tie loosened but not removed. He would have come straight from the car without stopping. He always came straight. "Hey," he said. "Hey yourself." He stood with her for a moment in the quiet. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and brought out a smooth gray stone, chosen from a different riverbank than last year's, but the same gesture, the same weight and intention, and placed it on the headstone. "I was here. I remember." "I've been thinking," he said. "About?" "What to do with the grave, long term." He looked at it thoughtfully. "It doesn't represent a death anymore. It represents a beginning." He glanced at her. "I thought we might have a small plaque added, different from the inscription." "What would it say?" He was quiet for a moment, the particular quiet of someone for whom words matter enough to be chosen carefully. "He was not lost," he said. "He was only somewhere else." Dot looked at the stone, at the bare dogwood above them, holding its blossoms in patience for the warmth still to come, at the hands of her son beside her, his right wrist, the star, always there, the same star that had brought them back to each other across 35 years and one October evening at a hotel in Atlanta. "That's good," she said. "I had help," he said, "recently, with words." She reached out and took his hand. He let her. He had been letting her more and more. The small gestures, the reaching and the allowing, the gradual grammar of a relationship that had no existing template and was therefore building its own, carefully, one ordinary moment at a time. They stood together in the February light, mother and son, found and still finding. The grave between them not a place of ending, but of beginning. The place where one story had been falsely closed so that another, longer, truer one could eventually open. In her bag was Gloria's sheet music. She carried it with her almost everywhere now, the way you carry things that have earned the right to be called talismans. She would play it again on Sunday. She played it most Sundays. The congregation at Jerusalem Baptist had decided, collectively without any formal vote, that it was simply part of the service now. The piece the woman with the silver hair played, the piece that made people sit up a little straighter and breathe a little deeper, the piece that sounded like something being returned to its rightful place. "Precious Lord, take my hand." The bare branches of the dogwood moved in the February wind, patient with their waiting. They walked back to the car together. Neither of them looked back. There was no longer anything behind them that required carrying. The future was where they were going, and they were going there together.